He is always a hard act to follow. I'm going to do my best and talk to you a little bit more about partnering with us. So I'm here today because your student will be taking several courses from us and our faculty in the College of Arts and Sciences, beginning with our core curriculum this fall. Additionally, if current statistics hold, about half the graduating class of 2023 will end up majoring in one of our 60-plus arts and science majors, going from actuarial science to women, gender, and sexuality studies, and lots of options in between. So on behalf of my counterparts in the Opus College of Business, the Schools of Education, Engineering, and Social Work, welcome. I know you've been welcomed a lot today, but I'm welcoming you again. I'm glad you're here with me. And I hope to share some things with you that you might find valuable. I'd like to start with a show of hands. How many of you have a son or daughter in college for the first time? Okay, so I'm going to guesstimate that that's a little bit more than half. How many of you, is this your last son or daughter you're sending to college? Congratulations. That is an excellent feeling, and what feels even better is when you watch that son or daughter walk across the stage at graduation. As a parent of 3 adult children who all attended college and finished on time, and I'm very proud of that, I remember attending a session like this not that long ago and really wanting to leave that day feeling reassured. And I'll talk a little bit about my youngest, my daughter, really wanting to feel that I was leaving her in good hands. I hope you feel that way both today when you leave campus and when you drop your son or daughter off this fall. I'm one of many team members in our Dean of Students office and academic counseling who work hard to assist all of our incoming and returning students. We want to partner with you to assist your student in making a successful transition to St. Thomas. And for some of us parents, we're making a transition too. Towards that goal, I would like to enlist your help and assistance. You can reinforce some important messages, act as a sounding board to help your student negotiate their first semester of college. As an associate dean, part of my job includes dealing with professor-student issues. So much of what I have to say comes from these experiences. So please encourage your students to do the following. First of all, take primary responsibility for his or her education. That slide you saw a few minutes ago, take your education. It really isn't about getting an education, it's about taking your education. You've been the driver. You helped your student make the decision to come here. You've been making decisions about elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, summer enrichment programs, the decision to come here. It's now time to maybe slide over to the passenger side of that driver's seat or become that annoying backseat driver. That doesn't mean you don't get to ask questions or provide your perspective. Please ask those questions. You're majoring in what? How's that going to work? That major requires math, and you don't like math. This is really important. What are you going to do with that? Please ask those questions because your students need to start thinking about how they're going to take that major and sell it potentially to an employer. While accounting has a straight career path, some engineering has a straight career path, things like philosophy don't necessarily seem to have a straight career path. My daughter was an English major. Don't laugh, she is not a barista at a coffee shop. She has a full-time job with a good company, and we'll talk a little bit more about her later in her path. Having said that, secondly, I'd ask you to support your student in finding their academic passion and majoring in it. All majors develop and reinforce skills important to careers, including the most important skill of all, how to be a successful, lifelong learner and to pivot in this increasingly globalized economy. But again, you get to ask those questions, what are you going to do with that? Because nobody wants the 30-year-old sleeping in their basement. Thirdly, please encourage your student. I know we've said this before and you'll hear it again and again. Please encourage them to take advantage of the many learning opportunities outside of the classroom, including internships, study abroad, student-faculty research, These opportunities add breadth and depth to the undergraduate experience. I'm a professor first and an associate dean second. So I believe what happens in the classroom is really, really important. But outside the classroom learning is also really valuable. And so I'm going to take 30 seconds to talk a little bit about something that my boss mentioned a few minutes ago, and that is to make a shameless plug, if you'll just indulge me for a minute here, about our Roman Power program. So a year from now, instead of dropping off your son or daughter to St. Paul, which is wonderful, and having them start their sophomore year of college, you could be taking them to the airport to catch a flight to Rome. Our Roman Power program is designed for fall semester sophomores. They live and study in Rome. They take core courses that work towards their core curriculum requirements. And I get to say that it costs the same amount of money as dropping off that son or daughter in St. Paul. And the reason I get to say that is it's our program, it's our Bernardi campus, so the financial aid works there. We charge the same fees for tuition, the same fee for the place to live, and our 35-bed residence in Rome. But we also offer a travel scholarship to get your student over there and to help out with some of the incidental expenses. So for the same price of taking art history in St. Paul, they can take art history in Rome. If that interests you, and more importantly, if it interests your son or daughter, please find me at the information fair at about 11:30 today, and I can provide more information. Number 4, please encourage your son or daughter to become involved in campus life by joining a club or activity. When I teach the senior seminar, the capstone course in sociology, I would always invite alumni to come back to campus and talk to our students. Now, these alumni didn't know each other. They were from different cohorts. They came on separate days. But interestingly enough, I found 2 common themes that every single one of our alumni said to our students when they were giving their advice. Number 1 was, build your resume and leadership skills by joining campus clubs and organizations. Clubs need treasurers. They need people to recruit. That teaches budget skills. That teaches organizational skills. That teaches leadership skills. The second thing they always said was, keep up your connections with your fellow students after graduation. These classmates, these friends, are your own personal Tommy network. Now, it occurred to me quite a while ago that I really wasn't doing good to get this advice in the fall semester of your senior year, where you have little time now to join a campus club or activity. But it sure makes sense to start giving that message now. Please encourage your student to stay on campus on weekends and become involved in campus life. If your student is a commuter, don't just drive home after your last class. Research shows that a sense of belonging, a feeling that you belong in college, fit in well, are socially integrated, is important for college success. Encourage your student to expand their social network beyond high school and make new friends and acquaintances. You know, it's a tendency of human beings to want to just hang out with people just like ourselves. Same age, same background. But the most interesting experiences really come from talking to people who don't look like you and don't necessarily have the same experiences. We enrich our lives when we seek out the other. Please encourage your students to do that. Please encourage your student to visit each of their professors this first semester during office hours at least once. Now, I'm going to show my age here, and maybe you don't want to raise your hand and admit to this, but how many of you remember those Maytag Repairman commercials from the 1980s? Okay, so a few brave souls have raised their hands. Well, for those of you younger parents that don't remember this or didn't see these commercials, the whole shtick was, buy a Maytag. Our machines are so good that a repairman never need to come out to repair them, and so they're lonely. They have nothing to do. I would argue that college professors during office hours are lonelier than the Maytag repairman. And I'll share another little secret with you, and this isn't a secret. You guys probably already know this. There is a grain of truth to that stereotype about the awkward professors. We are a little awkward. We're socially awkward. We sometimes get caught talking to our books. We're sometimes more comfortable with books than people. So your student would be doing us a huge favor if they would just come by during office hours and introduce themselves. Give us a chance to practice our skills. More seriously, what that office hour encounter can lead to is not just an opportunity to ask questions about a class, which is extremely important, but it could become the beginning of a personal relationship with a professor that leads to a mentoring relationship. One of the most important things college professors do is point out to students opportunities and help those students obtain those opportunities. So when you develop a mentoring relationship, a professor can say to you, I just heard of a really good internship opportunity that you might be a good fit for. Or, yeah, I'll write that letter of reference for graduate school. I can talk about that research project we did last summer. Or, you're a student in my class, but I got to know you. And so when I write that letter, I can show this holistic view. The best letters of reference don't just say I had this student in these 2 courses and these are the grades that they earned. The best letters of reference show that this professor knows the student and therefore can talk about their character, their ambition, their drive, their interests, and the skills that they've gained along the way. I want for each one of your students a mentoring relationship with a professor. But those interactions have to be a two-way street, and a student, the best way they can initiate those conversations is to go meet that professor after class and express interest. This isn't rocket science, but it's really important that students attend class regularly. And while you're in class, look attentive. Even if you're faking it, pretend you're interested in what's going on. I know that can be hard. I teach a statistics class for sociology and criminal justice majors. I know they're not that interested in the subject matter, but when they come to class, look engaged, pretend that they're having a good time, that can go a long way in terms of me trying to reach out to them and help them be successful in that class. I think it's really interesting that one of the few services where people are excited when they don't get it is education. Occasionally I have to say to my students, I'm really sorry, I won't be in class on this Wednesday because I'm attending a conference. And my students cheer. I don't think I'm unusual in that respect. I don't think it's a reflection on me as a teacher, but they cheer. Again, it's a statistics course, so I sort of get it. And I joke about it, and I say, you know what, if you don't feel like you're getting your money's worth, I'm happy to come in on a Saturday and spend that time with you, and nobody takes me up on that offer. They're happy to not come. But when we do have class, it's important to be there, to be engaged. Encourage your student to read class documents like syllabi carefully. Ask professors to clarify anything that is confusing or ambiguous. Syllabi are all different. And professors have different rules and different expectations. And I'll give you a quick example. In that statistics course that I teach, I encourage my students, I don't require, but I encourage my students to do their homework together. I joke and say, well, make sure you don't copy the answer word for word, or you shouldn't just copy the math down, you should really understand how to do it. But sometimes even simple arithmetic that I teach in a statistics course can be really intimidating. And so letting students do homework together can build confidence so that when they see similar problems on the exam, they're confident and can tackle them and do a good job. In another class, that might not be okay. In another class, that might be academic dishonesty, and that lands a student in my office. So do encourage your student to read those documents carefully because professors are going to hold them accountable. Coach your student to approach professors early and often with concerns or questions. Professors and staff aren't telepathic, we don't read minds, and while we can have some indicators that a student is struggling, we sometimes need a student to come to us and say, I really just don't get what's going on, I need some extra help. We have a campus full of caring adults, and if your student reaches out, we can get them connected to the right person or persons. Tell your student not to wait until mid-November, the last day to withdraw from a class without a grade, to ask this question, what can I do to improve my grade? By the way, this fall semester, that date is November 18th. I talked to a parent a couple years ago, and him and his son were on the phone with me talking about experiences in an economics course, and the dad was somewhat frustrated, and we were having a conversation, and I asked the student, I said, When did you did you go speak to your professor and tell him or her that she needed some assistance? And the student was honest with me, and I appreciated that. He said, well, I went in on November 18th, well, the equivalent of November 18th, and I asked the professor, what can I do to improve my grade? Well, there's still time at that point. 3/4 of the semester is already over. The time to ask that question is the first time you get a quiz or a paper or an exam back, and you don't understand your grade or you didn't do well. Better yet, the first time to ask that question is before you turn in an assignment and you're confused, your student is confused about what the expectations are. Do encourage your student to take advantage of student support services such as academic counseling, counseling and psychological services. Encourage your student, if they're eligible or we need to determine eligibility, to register with disability services if they need classroom accommodations. Some of the most difficult situations I've had to deal with involve a student who should have signed up with disability services, should have gotten registered for classroom accommodations, and the student decided, I'm going to try doing this on my own. I did this in high school, and I think I want to do it on my own, and I think that's a mistake. My youngest daughter, that I'll talk a little bit more about, has ADHD. And so I know what it's like as a parent to have a child that might need some classroom accommodations and maybe feels a little stigmatized for reaching out and asking for them. Please encourage your son or daughter not to feel that way. We have staff here, we're equipped to deal with it, and even if your student doesn't want to use them right away, if they're registered, we can react much more quickly if they've had a major exam and they didn't do well, and we come to realize they should have taken that exam in the testing service, or they should have had, the classroom note taker and so forth. So it is your son or daughter's choice whether they want to use those services or not, but please encourage them to at least get registered because we can react much more quickly. Encourage your student to take advantage of other academic assistance like the Writing Center, Mathematics Resource Center, and department-based tutors. Most of our departments have tutors. We have tutors for Theology 101. We have tutors for philosophy. We have tutors for economics. Encourage your students to use those tutors. Some of those tutors are probably just as lonely as college professors during office hours. Please encourage your student to try to resolve their problems first before stepping in to assist. This is a learning opportunity to manage their own affairs and gain confidence in their ability to problem solve. It is hard to watch our children stumble, and I've been through this. I've seen it, you probably have too. But picking themselves up and recovering creates resilience. U.S. psychologist Angela Duckworth studies what makes people successful. In her bestseller, Grit, The Power and Passion of Perseverance, Duckworth argues that the prime indicator of achievement isn't IQ or talent, but the possession of grit, the ability to dig in and keep going despite the headwinds, what we call tenacity. Resilience or grit isn't inborn. It's not something you can just choose to have. It is developed over time through facing adversity. Research shows that resilience is important for college success. Successful people have resilience in common. Coach your student how to talk to professors, but let them initiate the conversations when they're having difficulties. All 3 of my adult children called me from time to time to complain about their professors. And because I'm a professor myself, I was able to give them a little bit of a window on professor world, how professors think. I think that's not rocket science. I think a lot of it's common sense. I'll tell you a story about one of those incidences. When my kids called me, I would listen. I'd validate them. Yeah, that professor sounds like they're kind of being stubborn. On the other hand, I also listened and talked to them about, here is what you are doing that's not helping the situation. Here is what you should think about doing to make the situation better. My youngest daughter, I told you already, was an English major. And she was in her senior honors thesis class. And she was having trouble with a professor she'd never had before. And so she calls me on the phone. She's upset. She's complaining about him. He doesn't like me. He hates me. He's always picking on me. etc. And if she had called me a month earlier, I would have said to her, I would have given her this piece of advice: don't pick the novel that your professor wrote his dissertation on. But the boat had literally sailed, and she was stuck with Moby Dick. So at this point, she has a pretty bad relationship with him. And I will admit to you, for 30 seconds, I was tempted to call him up and say, why are you picking on my daughter? She's a good kid. But the truth of the matter is that my daughter had gone off her ADHD medication. She hadn't watched her pills. She hadn't called me to tell me that she was running out. I hadn't had a chance to refill the prescription. And so we had a few weeks there where she was kind of on her own, if you will. And when my daughter isn't on her ADHD medication, she's very chatty, a little rude. At least she appears that way to other people, disorganized, etc. So I said to her, you know, it's not your professor's fault you went off your medication. Your professor doesn't know you're on medication. And even though you're on medication, you can control your behavior. You don't need to be chatting to your friend Nick. Go apologize. Tell him your situation. Say you're sorry. I didn't call her professor. I didn't email him. I let her handle it herself. She came back home a month later, had finished the class. She's actually in our library working on a paper for another class that she's going to submit. She finds out her grade in her English class. And I went to see if she wanted to have lunch. And she's super excited. And she says, Mom, she goes, he gave me a grade better than I deserved. I don't promise that all these encounters with professors where there's difficulty will lead to that outcome. But I know that letting her handle it herself is what's helped make her resilient. She now lives in St. Louis. She has a job at a big company in St. Louis. And about a year after she graduated, it's summertime, it's about this time of the year, she calls me on the phone and she says really excitedly, Mom, I just had a car accident. Who calls you excited? So they just had a car accident. And I'm thinking, did you forget to take your ADHD medication? But I didn't ask. She says, it's okay, the lady was super nice. My daughter rear-ended the woman, by the way, so the accident was her fault. She calls super excited. She says, I knew exactly what to do. I gave her my insurance information. The woman was super nice about it. I'm going to call the company as soon as we get off the phone. And I'm thinking the whole time, not really listening to her, I'm thinking, you're not on my car insurance. You are not on my car insurance. This is costing me nothing. So I'm super excited about that. She finally realizes I'm not talking, and she says, gets kind of mad, and she says, how come you didn't ask me if I'm okay? And I said, well, you're talking to me, aren't you? That's kind of how we are. She came home last weekend and within 30 seconds criticized my outfit and everything else. But I love her and I'm proud of her because I know that, she can take care of herself. A year ago, she started an MBA program that her company is paying for. And she's in her first class, and she doesn't really have an issue with the professor, but she has an issue with some classroom dynamics and something that the professor said that she didn't know quite how to take. And she called me up and asked for advice again, and I gave her advice. A week later, I said, how is that going? And she says, well, I decided to do something different. I didn't do what you said I should do, but I did this instead, and it turned out this way. And you know what? And that's the best outcome. She handled it herself. She didn't need my advice. She considered it, went a different way. It worked out well. Resilience is important for our kids to have. Having said that, I do understand that there may be a time that you do need to step in. You do need to talk to the professor. You do need to get the professor's perspective. You might need to talk to me or somebody else here at the university. Please understand that your student has rights. I know that when I wrote that tuition check, I felt like she had waived all her rights. And you probably feel that way too, and I get it. But unfortunately, the federal government says that your student has rights, and it's called the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And so we will ask for a FERPA waiver, and once we have that FERPA waiver from your student, we can then share information about the course and give you the context that you're asking for. Finally, please ask your student to schedule any travel home for breaks in a way that does not interfere with coursework. The final exam schedule for fall 2019 is already posted online. Ask your student to check with each professor to confirm dates before making any travel plans. One of the biggest complaints I get right after Thanksgiving from professors is students are asking me to let them take the final early. They should take their final with their class, get all their finals done, then go home and enjoy their holiday break with you. I wish you and your students success and a productive fall semester. And if I can be helpful, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'll be available after the session today. After my colleague Susan Anderson speaks, I'll be available out in the hallway for a few minutes. You can also find me at the Academic Information Fair this afternoon. So at this time, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Susan Anderson, who's going to